standing in the doorway of my own kitchen when I came home from the hospital. My daughter and her husband, side by side, like they'd been rehearsing the pose. My daughter's arms were crossed. Her husband had his hands in his pockets, that easy stance he always had when he'd already decided how something was going to go. "We didn't think you'd be back so soon," my daughter said. I looked at her for a moment. Then I set my bag down on the porch step. The same bag I'd carried into the hospital 11 days earlier, the one with the small zipper pocket on the inside that nobody ever thought to check. "I live here," I said. She glanced at her husband. He nodded, almost imperceptibly. "Mom, we need to talk about the house." I already knew. I'd known since the third day in the cardiac unit when I called home and the phone rang out. When I called my daughter's cell and she answered on the fifth ring. Voice too bright, too careful. When she said things were fine without me asking if they were, I picked my bag back up and walked inside. My name is Gwendolyn. Most people call me Gwen. I'm 68 years old. I taught third grade for 31 years at Millbrook Elementary, and I have lived in the same house on Canary Street since 1987. The hydrangeas in the front yard were planted by my late husband, Frank. The kitchen was repainted twice, once badly, once right. The floors creak in exactly the places you'd expect them to. I know every corner of that house, the way you know the face of someone you've loved a long time. My daughter is Annette. She's 43. She married Conrad 6 years ago, and I tried to like him. I really did. He had good manners when he needed them and a firm handshake, and he remembered to call me on my birthday, but there was always something behind his eyes that I couldn't name. A kind of patience that felt less like kindness and more like waiting. My son is Philip. He's 39. He lives 4 hours away in Asheville with his wife and 2 kids and a rescue dog he talks about like a third child. He calls me every Sunday. Not every other Sunday. Every Sunday. That matters. This story is not about Philip. I had the cardiac episode on a Tuesday in March. I was in the middle of grading, force of habit even in retirement. I volunteered twice a week at the school, and I felt a tightness across my chest that I'd been ignoring for 2 weeks. This time, I didn't ignore it. I drove myself to St. Ellery Medical, which, I was later told, was inadvisable. But I made it. They kept me for observation, then found a blockage, then kept me longer. 11 days total. I had my bag, my phone charger, and a paperback I never opened. Philip drove up on day 3 and sat with me for 2 days before I made him go home to his family. He called every morning at 7. Annette came once. Day 5. She brought flowers that were nice and stayed for 40 minutes and left saying she had a work thing. Conrad didn't come at all. I didn't make much of it at the time. People have lives. I didn't need hovering. What I needed was rest, and rest was what I got. But on day 8, something made me pick up the phone and call my bank. I don't know what made me do it exactly. Maybe it was the particular way Annette had looked at me when she left, not worried, just brisk, checking something off a list. Maybe it was the memory of Conrad asking me 3 months earlier whether I'd ever considered simplifying my finances. He'd used that word, simplifying. Like my savings were clutter. The automated system read me my balance. I sat very still for a long time. Then I called again, thinking I'd misheard. I hadn't. $41,000 gone from the joint account I'd made the mistake of adding Annette to 2 years ago after Frank died because she'd said it would make things easier if something happened to me. I'd believed her. I'd been soft with grief, and I believed her. I set the phone face down on the hospital blanket and looked out the window at the parking structure. Somewhere in that bag on the chair beside my bed, in the inner zipper pocket, was a document I'd had drawn up 8 months ago by a woman named Georgina Hale at Breyer and Hale Legal on Westmont Avenue. I'd told no one, not Philip, not Annette, not anyone. I wasn't sure why I'd done it. I didn't have a reason, not a specific one. I just had a feeling, the kind you learn to trust after 68 years, that a person should have something that belongs only to them. I was very glad I'd listened to that feeling. Frank died 26 months before the hospital. Pancreatic cancer. 7 weeks from diagnosis to the end. Wish the doctors called fast and I called mercy because watching him suffer would have been worse. We'd been married 41 years. For the first several months, I didn't do much of anything. Philip came when he could. Annette called more than usual. People brought food, and then they stopped bringing food, and then it was just me and the house and the hydrangeas coming back in May like they always did, indifferent to everything. Annette started coming around more in the fall. She and Conrad both, they'd help with things, gutter cleaning, grocery runs, a leaky faucet in the second bathroom. I was grateful. I said so. I made dinners and sent them home with leftovers, and I thought this is what family does. This is what getting older looks like. People step in. It was Conrad who first mentioned the finances, in December 2 years ago now. We were at the kitchen table, and he said it casually, like a thought he'd just had. Did I have a financial advisor? Had I looked into consolidating accounts? He had a guy, very trustworthy, could sit down with me if I wanted. I said I'd think about it. Annette followed up in January. She framed it as worry. Mom, you're managing so much on your own. Dad always handled certain things, right? It's a lot. We just want to make sure you're protected. Protected? I turned that word over in my mind for days. I added her to the joint account in February. I told myself it was practical. I was 66. Frank was gone. Annette lived 20 minutes away. If something happened, she could access funds immediately. It made sense. What I didn't do was remove my own name, close the old accounts, or ask a single question about what joint actually meant in practice. That was my mistake. I own it. When I got home from the hospital 11 days later, Tuesday again, full circle, and found them in my doorway, I didn't say anything about the money. Not yet. I walked in, made tea, said I was tired and needed to lie down. My daughter looked relieved. My son-in-law looked something else. I slept for 2 hours. Real sleep, not performance. When I woke up, I took the bag from the foot of the bed and unzipped the inner pocket. The document was there, folded once, slightly soft at the crease. I'd read it so many times I knew the language by heart, but I read it again. Irrevocable living trust, established in my name alone. Designating my assets, including the house on Canary Street. The investment account Frank and I had built over 30 years, and the proceeds from the sale of his woodworking equipment, to pass directly to my grandson Oliver upon my death, with a secondary beneficiary arrangement for a small fund to go to Millbrook Elementary's reading program. Annette was not mentioned. Conrad was not mentioned. I had done this quietly, without drama, without announcement, without any intention of using it as a weapon. I'd done it because Georgina Hale had asked me, at the end of our first meeting, who I trusted most in my life. I thought about it seriously, and I'd said, honestly, my grandson. He was 19 then, a sophomore at USIN, studied environmental science, called me Grammy, came every Thanksgiving without being asked. He didn't know about the trust, nobody did. I folded the document back up and placed it in the pocket and zipped it closed. Then I went downstairs and told my daughter and her husband they needed to leave. Annette called 4 times that evening. I answered the third. Mom, I think we need to clear the air. The account, I said. Silence. Mom, the joint account. $41,000. I'd like you to tell me why. Another silence. Longer. We were going to tell you. Conrad found a property, a real investment opportunity, and the timing was tight. We knew you'd want to help if we asked. You didn't ask. And we were planning to pay it back in net. My voice was very even. I'd taught 3rd grade for 31 years. I knew how to be very even when it mattered. You took money from my account without asking. While I was in the hospital. It's a joint account. Yes, I said, and that was my mistake, not permission. She started to say something about the property, the investment, the timing. I let her finish. Then I said, I'm going to need you to transfer the $41,000 back by Friday. If that's not possible, I'll contact my bank about unauthorized withdrawal. I imagine there's a process for that. More silence. You wouldn't do that. I already spoke to them this afternoon, I said. There is a process. I haven't started it yet. She hung up. I made dinner. Scrambled eggs and toast. I ate at the kitchen table and watched the light change in the backyard and thought about Frank. He'd been a quiet man, steady as furniture. He would have seen Conrad coming from a mile off and said nothing until he had to, and then he would have said one sentence that covered everything. I missed that. I missed having someone in the house who understood what I meant before I finished saying it. But I was here and he was not. And I had raised a daughter who took $41,000 from her mother's account while her mother was in the cardiac unit. And I had to decide what that meant. Philip called Sunday as usual. I told him, not all of it. Enough. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Mom, do you need me to come up? Not yet, I said. I never trusted him. I know. You knew too. I did, I said. I never trusted him. I know. You knew too. I did, I said. I just hoped I was wrong. That's the thing about hope. It's not stupidity. It's just hope. And sometimes it runs out before the thing you were hoping against does. Philip offered to drive up the following weekend. I told him I'd call if I needed him sooner. He said to call Georgina Hale in the morning. I already had her number pulled up on my phone. Georgina Hale was not what people expect when they picture a lawyer. She was small, direct, wore her hair in a single braid, and had a way of listening that made you feel like every word you said was being stored somewhere useful. She'd grown up in the same part of Ohio I had, which was how we'd ended up in the same room to begin with, a mutual friend's retirement party years ago. We'd stayed in loose touch. When I called her office the next morning and she picked up herself, I told her what had happened. Tell me about the joint account, she said. I told her. And the trust is intact? Yes. Good. A pause. They can't touch the house, Gwen, or the investment account. Those were structured separately, and the trust predates any current relationship dynamics. I know, I said, but the 41,000, that's different. That's potentially recoverable. But it depends on documentation and their willingness to cooperate. It may be faster and cleaner to pursue it as a civil matter than through the bank's process, depending on what you want. What I want, I said slowly, is to never again be in a position where anyone can reach into my life without asking. She was quiet a moment. Then let's close the joint account entirely, today if possible, and let's look at adding some additional protections to the trust. I also want to add something, I said, for my grandson. A letter to be opened when the time comes, not legal language. Personal. That's easy to do. And I want a clause, I said, that if anyone contests the trust after I'm gone, they receive nothing. She didn't hesitate. A no contest clause. Standard. Done. The $41,000 came back in 2 transfers over the next 10 days. No phone call, no explanation, just the funds appearing to my account the way they disappeared without conversation. I noticed the irony. I thanked no one because I was not thanked. Conrad called once, left a voicemail saying there had been a misunderstanding and he hoped we could move past it as a family. His voice was smooth, practiced, the way it was at Thanksgiving when he told stories about himself. I listened to it twice and then deleted it. Annette didn't call for 3 weeks. When she did, she was different, quieter, less practiced. She called on a Wednesday evening and I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up. The same instinct that had made me call the bank from my hospital bed. I've been thinking, she said. I waited. I knew it was wrong when we did it. I knew. Okay, I said. Conrad said it would be fine. Said you'd understand once we explained. I let him. She stopped. I let him. I sat with that for a moment. My daughter was not stupid. She wasn't cruel by nature. She had been a sweet child, earnest, the kind who made Mother's Day cards with actual effort. Something had shifted in her over the years with Conrad, a gradual narrowing, like a window being closed inch by inch until the room ran out of air. "I believe you," I said. And I did, partly. "Does that change anything?" "It changes how I think about you," I said. "It doesn't change what I've already put in place." She was quiet. "You took money from me while I was in a hospital bed, Annette. You and your husband. I need you to understand that I know that, and that I will not pretend I don't." "I know," she said softly. "I'm not shutting you out. I'm not writing you off. But I need you to understand something." I looked out the kitchen window at the hydrangeas, pale and full in the evening light. I spent a long time being easy, being the kind of person who didn't make waves, and I convinced myself that was love. But it wasn't. It was just me making myself smaller so nobody had to feel uncomfortable around me. She didn't say anything. "I'm done with that," I said. "Not with you, just with that." Oliver came the following Saturday without me asking. He drove 3.5 hours from Chapel Hill and arrived with a bag of groceries and that loose-limbed ease he'd had since he was small, the way some people just take up space without apology. He didn't know about any of it. I hadn't told him about the hospital, about the money, about the trust. He'd found out about the hospital from Philip and showed up, he said, because Grammy didn't sound like herself on the phone last week. He was not wrong. We made dinner together. He chopped vegetables badly and with great confidence, the way young people do. We ate at the kitchen table, and he told me about a wetland restoration project he was working on, a small creek system outside Greensboro, and he talked about it the way Frank used to talk about wood, with his hands, with more specificity than the listener needed, with love. I told him a little of what had happened. Not the trust, not yet. Just the account, the hospital, the visitors in my doorway. He went very still. "She took it while you were." "Yes." He looked down at his plate. He was choosing his words carefully, which was not his usual way. "Grammy," he said finally, "you know you don't have to protect people who don't protect you." 20 years old, and he already knew that. Frank would have been proud of him. "I know," I said. "I'm figuring out who does." He stayed the night without being asked. He fixed the lock on the back gate that had been sticking since October and replaced a light bulb in the hallway that I'd been avoiding because the ladder scared me. He did it all like it wasn't anything, just tasks that needed doing, the way Philip used to when he was home. Before he left Sunday morning, he hugged me at the door, that good strong hug he'd had since he was a teenager. "You call me," he said, "anytime." I stood on the porch after his car turned the corner in the cool spring air and felt something I hadn't felt in a while. Not happiness exactly, more like solidity, like standing on ground that had settled. The letter from Conrad's lawyer came on a Thursday. Cream-colored envelope, dense legal text, all the polished language that means someone has decided to make something into a fight. It cited undue influence. It questioned the validity of my trust, implied that my age and recent health event suggested impaired judgment. It requested access to financial documentation and suggested that certain assets ought to be reviewed for equitable distribution given the, quote, nature of the marriage between your daughter and client, close quote. My daughter's marriage gave Conrad no legal standing over my assets. Georgina had told me this before the letter arrived. I'd known it was coming. Conrad was not a man who accepted closed doors. I read the letter at the kitchen table with my coffee, and then I set it down and called Georgina. "Got it," she said when she picked up. "All ready. I expected it." They have no case, Gwen. The trust was established before the events in question. You were independently documented as competent. Your physician can provide a letter. The no contest clause isn't triggered yet, but if they proceed formally, Annette gets nothing regardless. Does Annette know that? A pause. That's a conversation you may want to have with her. I thought about it for a moment. Then I said, no, let her find out when the time comes. I've said what I had to say to her. The rest is between her and the choices she's making. Georgina was quiet. Then, all right, I'll respond to their attorney today. That night, I didn't sleep well, but not from fear, from a kind of restless awareness, the way you feel before a storm breaks, knowing it's coming and knowing you've done everything you can. I lay in the dark and listened to the house creak and thought about Frank, about the years we'd spent in that house, about how he'd fixed the basement ceiling 3 times before he finally got it right and never once complained, just went back down and did it again. I thought about Annette at 7 years old, sitting on this same kitchen floor, cutting out shapes from construction paper, concentrating so hard the tip of her tongue stuck out. I thought about her at 17, standing in the backyard in her prom dress, laughing at something I'd said, her neck thrown back. I thought about the person she had become and the person she might have been, and the distance between those two things. I didn't cry. I just let it be what it was. Annette called 2 weeks later. She'd gotten a letter from Georgina's office, she said. A formal notice that if the contest proceeded, she would be excluded from the trust entirely. Conrad didn't tell me that part, she said. No, I said. I don't imagine he did. He's been telling me this whole time that we had a case, that the trust was recent enough that a judge might. She stopped. He said you weren't thinking clearly. I'm thinking clearly now, I said. Silence. I think I need to get my own lawyer, she said quietly. I almost didn't say anything, but then I did. That might be the first good idea you've had in a while, I said. And I meant it gently. I really did, the way you mean something gently, when it also happens to be the plain truth. Spring came the way it always did on Canary Street, too fast and then all at once. The hydrangeas came back. I had the fence repainted. I started walking in the evenings again, the long loop around the park that Frank and I used to do after dinner, and I went alone now. But I didn't mind it the way I used to. Oliver drove up once a month. Sometimes we just sat on the porch, which was enough. He never asked about the trust or the legal situation. He asked about my hydrangeas and about Millbrook Elementary and whether I was sleeping well. He asked questions like someone who was interested in the answers. Philip called every Sunday. Annette called occasionally. Things were different between us, thinner in some ways, cleaner in others. She'd filed for separation from Conrad in April. She didn't tell me why specifically, and I didn't ask. Some things are too complicated for a single explanation and too personal for a mother to push at. I just said I was sorry it was hard and that I was here if she needed me. You don't have to say that, she said. I know, I said. I'm saying it anyway. On a Friday in May, I drove to Georgina's office to sign the updated documents. New protections added, the language tightened, everything in order. She handed me the folder across the desk, the complete record, everything I needed. I held it for a moment. It wasn't a dramatic feeling. Nobody was watching. There was no audience for what I felt in that office. Just Georgina across the desk and the sound of traffic outside and a potted fern on the windowsill that needed water. But it felt like something. Like setting your feet on ground after a long time treading water. You're sure about Oliver? Georgina asked. I'm sure. And the library fund? Frank loved that library, I said. He proposed to me across the street from it. Over very bad pie. She smiled. Good enough reason. I signed. Oliver came that Saturday. He didn't know about the document. I hadn't told him yet, and I wouldn't for a while. Some things are better given quietly, without fanfare, without expectation. He showed up with coffee and a plant he'd found at the farmer's market. Some kind of trailing green thing. Good for low light, he said, for the hallway corner. We sat on the porch while he drank his coffee and I had my tea, and he told me about the creek project, that they'd finished the first phase and the water clarity was already improving, which apparently was a big deal. He explained why. I listened like it was an art. After a while, he looked out at the hydrangeas. You doing okay, Grammy? Better, I said. Yeah? Better than I've been in a while, actually. He nodded, satisfied with that. The way he was always satisfied with that. The way he was always satisfied with honest answers. I thought about giving him the letter then, the one I'd written to be opened later, the one that explained what was his and why. But it wasn't time. That letter was for a day I hoped was far off. And in the meantime, the afternoon was warm, and the hydrangeas were full, and my grandson was on my porch asking if I needed anything. "There's one thing," I said. "Name it. That lock on the front gate is sticking again." He set down his cup and stood up without sighing, without checking his phone, without making it anything other than what it was, something that needed doing, so he'd do it. I watched him walk around the side of the house. I heard the gate click, and then the sound of him working at it, patient and unhurried. The afternoon sat around me, warm and unhurried. I had spent a long time believing that love meant not asking for what you needed, that the way you showed people you loved them was to make yourself easy, convenient, undemanding, that if you just gave enough and forgave enough and stepped back enough, they would eventually see you for what you were and respond in kind. I don't believe that anymore. Love is not the absence of boundaries. Love is showing up with groceries without being asked and fixing the gate without sighing and calling every Sunday because you know what Sunday means to someone. Love is Georgina Hale picking up the phone herself. Love is a creek getting cleaner, one slow phase at a time. What I had confused for love all those years was just my own fear of being inconvenient. I know the difference now. If this story sounds familiar, if you have given and found yourself standing in a hospital bed wondering where your savings went, I want you to hear this. It is not too late to put something in the inner pocket of the bag. It is not too late to call the lawyer. It is not too late to close the account, draw the line, and stand on your own porch in the spring sunlight like someone who has remembered that it belongs to them. You're allowed to protect yourself, even from people you love, even now. If this meant something to you, leave a comment. I'd like to know I'm not the only one who needed to hear it. I've thought a lot about the word trust since all of this happened. Not the legal kind, not the document Georgina drew up for me, though that matters too. I mean the quiet, everyday kind, the kind you extend to someone when you add their name to an account, or leave the spare key under the same stone for 30 years, or answer the phone on the fourth ring, even when you're not sure you want to. I trusted Annette because she was my daughter and I loved her and I believed those two things were enough. What I didn't account for was that love and character are not the same thing. You can love someone completely and still not truly know what they'll do when money is on the table and you're not in the room. That's not cynicism. That's just something I had to learn the hard way at 68 in a cardiac unit on the third floor of St. Ellery Medical. What I've come to understand is that the choices we make, large and small, have a way of compounding. Conrad spent years making small choices, a suggestion here, a question there, a patient kind of maneuvering, and each one by itself seemed harmless. But they added up, and Annette made choices too, small ones, choosing to listen to him instead of her own instincts, choosing convenience over honesty, until one day she was standing in her mother's kitchen having crossed a line she couldn't uncross. That's how it usually works. It's rarely one big decision. It's 100 small ones that nobody notices until the damage is done. And I made choices too. I made myself easy. I made myself the kind of person who didn't ask questions when a son-in-law used the word simplifying about my savings. I made myself the kind of person who added her name to an account because the grief was too heavy and it was easier to say yes than to think it through. I don't say this to blame myself. I say it because owning your part of a story is the only way to actually learn from it. The part I keep coming back to is Oliver. That boy drove 3.5 hours because his grandmother didn't sound like herself. He fixed the gate. He asked about the hydrangeas. He said, without drama, that you don't have to protect people who don't protect you. He'd figured that out at 20 that some people spend their whole lives missing. Resilience isn't what I used to think it was. I used to think it meant not breaking, Now I think it means breaking quietly, in private, and then getting up and calling the lawyer in the morning. It means sitting in a hospital room with a document in the inside pocket of your bag and having had the wisdom to put it there 8 months earlier without knowing exactly why. It means trusting your own instincts even when it would be easier not to. The account is whole again. The trust is filed. Conrad's attorney got a response that apparently left nothing to argue about. Annette is making her own hard choices now, separate from the ones I made. And on Friday evenings, sometimes, Oliver calls just to talk. Not about anything important, just to talk. I've decided that's what I was actually building all along. Not the house, not the savings, not any of it. Just the kind of life where someone calls on a Friday evening because they want to, not because they have to. That's the thing worth protecting. That's always been the thing.